Imagine a time when a single idea sparked a transformation in medieval society. It begins with a solitary genius, someone without friends, who decided to charge for something that had been free for centuries. Before you settle in, consider liking this video and subscribing only if you truly appreciate what I share. I'd love to hear from you in the comments about where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always intriguing to connect with viewers from around the globe. In the days before taxes, tolls, and emotional burdens took root in medieval Europe, there existed a communal bread oven, a cherished haven for peasants. The concept was simple. You brought your humble ball of dough, and your neighbor brought theirs, slightly less hopeful. Together you baked in a structure that seemed to echo the ages. There were no fees, no rules, no lords hovering in judgment, just peasants, the warmth of the fire, and a lingering scent of hope. But then, disaster struck. One fateful morning, the local lord awoke with an unsettling sense of joy wafting through his territory. He heard laughter, a peasant whistling, and a woman expressing contentment. Such joy was dangerous. It could spread. Fueled by indignation, he stormed into the village square, glared at the oven as if it owed him money, and proclaimed, "This belongs to me now." Imagine this. You're a starving farmer in the year 1140 AD, clutching your dough. You hear a man, someone who has never touched flour, telling you that heat has become a luxury. Confusion spreads among the peasants, much like chickens watching a strange contraption being built. "But my lord," someone whispers, "the oven belongs to the community." The lord, a man who believes grain comes prepackaged, simply smiles and says, "Not anymore." In that moment, baking transforms into a luxury experience. No coin means no bread, and suddenly you find yourself navigating the complexities of medieval intermittent fasting permanently. Some brave souls attempt to bake at home, but medieval houses are more like flammable suggestions. One spark could ignite an entire neighborhood, turning it into a scene straight out of Mordor. So even the pursuit of self-sufficiency becomes a risky endeavor. The Lord capitalizes on this chaos. If your bread burns, there's a fee. If you accidentally set the oven ablaze, the fee grows even larger. If you dare to complain, you face an insolence fee. Even the simplest act of breathing too loudly while waiting in line incurs an unspecified fee that changes daily. What was once a community gathering has morphed into a medieval DMV, complete with long lines, slow service, and one man at the helm who clearly relishes his power over everyone. In response, the peasants adapt in the only way they know how. They navigate this new reality, finding ways to cope with the absurdity of their situation. Picture a scene where quiet resentment simmers just beneath the surface. You might hear muttered phrases like, "May a goat sneeze on his stew, and may his boots get wet forever." Yet, deep down, there's a shared understanding among the people. This is merely the beginning. If a lord can impose a charge for baking, what's to stop him from charging for anything? Walking, existing, perhaps even looking at birds the wrong way. Medieval Europe seems to have slipped into a darker chapter. Before these lords discovered the art of taxing the very essence of life, sunlight and happiness, there was one constant the peasants could rely on: the rivers. Water flowed freely, fish swam without a care, and the only real danger was drowning, which, to be honest, felt preferable to facing the landlord. In those times, rivers were lifelines for the community. You drank from them, washed in them, and sometimes turned a blind eye to your neighbor's questionable activities. It was a natural system, open and accessible, perfect for those with no money, no rights, and little energy left. Then, one fateful afternoon, a nobleman on horseback paused by the river, glaring at the water as if it had offended him. He declared, "This shall now be taxed." Can you imagine the shock? The peasants froze mid-drink, like startled deer caught in the light of a torch. "Taxed, my lord? But the river flows." Imagine a time when crossing a river came with a price. In the medieval era, river tolls emerged as a peculiar form of taxation. If you wanted to cross, you had to pay. But even if you stayed put, there was a chance you could still owe money. The noble class believed that the mere possibility of crossing one day was valuable enough to charge for it. They constructed wooden toll bridges, even over shallow streams that you could wade through for free. Choosing to wade instead of using the bridge? Congratulations, you just committed toll evasion, a crime that could lead to fines, or if the guard was feeling particularly bored, a rather grim demonstration involving drowning. Peasants attempted to argue their case, claiming that the river belonged to God. The lords would respond, "Yes, and God gave me permission to charge you." And so, the tolls continued. The most frustrating part? These lords rarely maintained the rivers. They didn't understand how rivers functioned. Some of them even believed that water flowed downhill, simply out of respect for their authority. Yet, they still imposed taxes on it. In some regions, creativity flourished. Villages introduced a range of fees: drinking fees, hydration taxes, fishing licenses, and even a tax for merely thinking about crossing the river with livestock. It was a time filled with absurdities, where even the simplest actions came with a cost. Reflect on this peculiar history and consider how far we've come. Wouldn't it be interesting to explore more about the ways societies have evolved? Imagine a scene where cows are peacefully contemplating a stream. Suddenly, that serene moment transforms into something unexpected, a taxable event. By the end of the century, rivers that had flowed freely for millions of years are now akin to medieval ATMs. Instead of dispensing money, they are taking it away. All of this stems from one man's curious thought: how can I complicate this? Long before the concept of an all-encompassing tax emerged, peasants relied on a simple, tranquil ritual: grinding their grain at home. Each family possessed a hand mill, just two rocks, a bit of arm strength, and a flickering hope that this year's harvest wouldn't taste like earth and despair. It wasn't glamorous or quick, but it was free, and in the Middle Ages, that freedom was viewed with suspicion. Then enters the medieval lord, a figure so disconnected from the land that he couldn't recognize a stalk of wheat if it stood right in front of him. One morning, he hears a sound drifting across his manor, a rhythmic scraping, the unmistakable noise of peasants grinding grain without offering him any money. To him, that sound signifies lost revenue, not industriousness. In a flash, he rides into the village, points dramatically at the innocent grinding stones, and proclaims, "These are now illegal." Just like that, the hand mills, tools that had served the peasants for generations, become contraband, turning their simple way of life upside down. Imagine owning a mill in medieval times, a symbol of power akin to running an underground casino. Suddenly, everyone is compelled to bring their grain to the Lord's monopoly mill. This mill is run by a man who clearly doesn't prioritize hygiene and has a knack for judging the quality of your grain. The process unfolds like this. You haul your heavy sack of grain to the mill, standing behind a line of 20 other discontented people. You pay a fee, only to watch as the miller slyly keeps the best handfuls for himself. Then, just for good measure, you face a second fee, because he feels like it. You return home with less flour than you began with, and your spirit is significantly diminished. You might think about grinding grain at home, but beware, mill inspectors exist, and they will raid your cottage, confiscating your stones and fining you for the offense of unauthorized milling. If you're caught a second time, they might destroy your millstones entirely. It sounds dramatic, but remember, they are just rocks. Breaking them is akin to a public tantrum. One lord even noted in his records, "The peasants must not grind grain themselves, for independence breeds arrogance." In simpler terms, he knew he couldn't charge them if they managed to do it efficiently. To make matters worse, the Lord's mill is far from reliable. It frequently breaks down, gets stuck, floods, freezes, catches fire, or even explodes, because let's face it, the laws of physics were still a mystery back then. It's a frustrating cycle, isn't it? Imagine a world where the choices of the peasants are limited. Regardless of whether the mill operates or not, the fee remains unchanged. This is a striking example of medieval innovation. Take something that should be free, make it less accessible, impose a fee, and label it as progress. For the medieval peasant, firewood serves as an emotional anchor. It represents warmth in the cold, nourishment in hunger, and perhaps a moment of solace behind the barn, away from the weight of feudalism. Firewood is the one resource they can gather without seeking permission or facing reprimands about trespassing on the Lord's land. It falls from trees naturally, a gift from nature itself. There's no middleman involved, which, as you might guess, sets the stage for inevitable conflict. One crisp morning, the local baron, a man with the economic insight of a parking meter, rides through his forest and witnesses something alarming. A peasant is bent down, picking up a single meager stick, a stick that likely won't even burn well. Yet, in that moment, the baron's mind ignites with profit-driven fury. To him, it feels as if he has caught someone stealing warmth from right beneath his nose. Meanwhile, the peasant simply sees a twig, a common object, and acts without overthinking it. Isn't it fascinating how perspectives can clash so dramatically? The baron settles back into his estate, pouring himself a lavish goblet of wine. As he gazes at the wall, an idea strikes him. What if he claimed ownership over every stick in the forest? By week's end, proclamations announce that the woods are now designated as royal timberland. In simpler terms, this means he's planning to charge for something he barely recognized just moments ago. The peasants are taken aback. How could anyone lay claim to fallen wood? Trees don't sign contracts. Gravity handles most of the work. Yet, during the Middle Ages, ownership often hinged not on logic, but on who wore the shiniest boots and had the least compassion. Before long, collecting firewood turns into a task requiring the baron's permission. He grants it, of course, but only for a fee that feels exorbitant. Peasants wander into the forest, permits hanging from their belts like sorrowful decorations, hoping not to encounter the baron's guards. These men lurk in the shadows, ready to pounce and shout things like, "Drop that stick, you criminal." In a twist of fate, the peasants start gathering firewood under cover of night. They move stealthily through the trees, clutching twigs as if they were treasures. Meanwhile, the baron sleeps soundly, lost in dreams of new ways to charge for something as essential as air. Isn't it intriguing how power shifts and transforms the simplest of needs? Imagine a time when the simplest of tasks could lead to dire consequences. If a peasant happened to pick up a branch that was just a bit too fresh, they faced accusations of cutting live wood. The punishment for this crime seemed exaggerated, as if the baron were seeking revenge for a deep personal loss. Firewood, once abundant and free, transformed into a luxury item, a reminder of how the ruling class capitalized on every necessity of life. Walking was one of the few activities that medieval peasants could enjoy without fear of repercussions. They traversed fields, visited markets, attended church, and faced their own fates, all without spending a single coin. Their lives resembled a never-ending, arduous trek. Yet, even this simple freedom was viewed as a threat by those in power. It all began with a seemingly harmless act. A baron decided to enhance the main road by removing 2 stones, proudly claiming he had modernized the infrastructure. Yet, he soon erected a wooden gate across the very path he had just improved. This gate wasn't for protection or aesthetics. It served a singular purpose: to charge peasants for the privilege of moving forward in their lives. The first peasant to reach this gate paused for a moment, bewildered. Was this a cruel joke, or the start of something profoundly foolish? A guard steps forward, looking bored, clutching a spear that suggests he lacks proper training. With an air of importance, he declares, "To pass, you must pay the road toll." You can see the confusion on the peasant's face. For him, walking isn't a luxury, it's his only means of transportation, aside from the risk of collapsing from exhaustion. Yet the guard remains firm. The Lord has decreed that the roads require maintenance, even though they are little more than muddy paths sprinkled with hope and the occasional dead sheep. Soon, every traveler must pay to traverse these roads. Merchants, monks, and barefoot children carrying turnips form a line, all obliged to hand over money just to walk on dirt that they have compacted with their own feet for generations. If you dare to circumvent the gate and tread through the grass instead, another guard appears as if he has sprung from the very soil, demanding a fine for bypassing the Lord's infrastructure. Even more absurd, some lords impose tolls on roads they neither improve nor even own, merely claiming the land because it's visible from their tower on a clear day. If the peasants voice their objections, the lord simply invokes the medieval equivalent of legal precedent. Because I said so, walking, once a simple act, transforms into an economic gamble. Every journey requires careful planning, budgeting, and perhaps even a prayer or two for good measure. In those times, people began to take the long way around, sneaking through forests and marshes like fugitives, all to avoid the tolls imposed for using the land. This walking tax became a peculiar medieval invention, transforming mere survival into a financial obligation. In the Middle Ages, even gravity seemed to bow to the nobility's whims. Fishing had once been the last refuge for the medieval peasant. The river offered no judgment. It didn't care about their appearance or their social standing. It simply flowed, teeming with fish that might have wondered why humans were always so sorrowful nearby. For generations, peasants made their way to the water, casting crude nets in hopes of catching something, anything beyond the usual boots, rocks, or deep existential worry. Fish were free to take, not because the Lord permitted it, but because no one had yet thought to claim ownership over creatures that had no property deeds. Then, one fateful afternoon, a nobleman standing on a bridge had a catastrophic idea that historians might well label an official disaster of the medieval era. As he watched a peasant pull a wriggling trout from the river, instead of feeling empathy or joy for the man's fortune, he was struck by a sudden, overwhelming desire to own the entire river. He speaks with the assuredness of someone who has never faced the challenges of reality. "The fish are mine," he declares. The peasants gaze back at him, bewildered, struggling to comprehend how someone could claim ownership over creatures that dwell in the depths of the river, creatures that have never heard of taxes. Yet the noble insists that the river falls within his domain. Thus, everything within it belongs to him. This includes not just the fish, but also frogs, reeds, and perhaps a few bewildered eels. Fishing transforms into a regulated activity. However, in medieval times, licenses are not mere pieces of parchment. They manifest as verbal threats disguised as permissions. The Lord's bailiff patrols the riverbanks, ever vigilant for anyone daring to catch their dinner without proper authorization. If you reel in a fish without paying, it's deemed theft, theft of something that nature has provided, which you have caught with your own hands. Consequences vary. Some peasants face fines, while others have their nets confiscated. A few find themselves dragged before the Lord, receiving lectures on the importance of respecting authority, which can feel like a punishment in itself. If you are caught fishing repeatedly, the Lord might take your boat, strip away your dignity, or, in the most extreme cases, your freedom. After all, nothing embodies justice quite like imprisoning someone for catching a humble carp. The absurdity of it all doesn't end there. Some lords imposed seasonal fishing fees, believing winter fish held greater value. Others taxed by species, as if a pike could grasp its own market worth. One particularly ambitious noble even tried to tax fish that accidentally leapt into buckets during storms. Theorem. In this way, the river, once a source of life, transformed into a medieval marketplace where prices soared, surveillance was relentless, and the fish had no say in the matter. Rain stood out as one of the few reliable blessings in the medieval world. It fell from the sky without demanding payment. It nourished crops, replenished rivers, and gave peasants something to grumble about that wasn't hunger, disease, or feudal obligations. Best of all, it was free, an unrepeatable gift in medieval Europe. However, trouble brewed when a particularly enterprising lord gazed out his manor window during a storm, observing the peasants' roofs shimmering with fresh rainwater. He felt an inexplicable fury that nature dared to offer hydration without seeking his permission first. In his mind, water cascading onto his land equated to water that belonged to him. So, he declared a new rule with the confidence of someone who had never grasped the laws of nature. What do you think might have happened next? Imagine a world where every drop of rain that falls upon your land belongs to someone else. The peasants, bewildered and soaked, grapple with this startling idea. To them, the sky has always been a free entity, untouched by the constraints of earthly ownership. It doesn't pay rent or attend any feudal gatherings. It merely exists above, indifferent to the struggles below. Yet the Lord remains resolute. If rain lands on your bucket, your barrel, your roof, or even your head, you are expected to pay a small fee for the unauthorized collection of this precious water. Yes, simply getting wet could now be considered a crime. The peasants protest, pointing at the clouds and the vast open sky, arguing that water is not a sentient servant of the Lord. But in this medieval reality, logic seems to follow a one-way path. The Lord claims the clouds drift over his estate, thus they are complicit in his demands. It's absurd, yet absurdity wields power when enforced by armed guards. Desperate to evade this new decree, the villagers attempt to gather rainwater in secret. They hide barrels behind their homes, place buckets under eaves during the dark of night, and cup their hands carefully during storms. Still, the Lord's guards are unyielding, patrolling the skies with a vigilance akin to modern security, chasing teenagers from shopping malls. In this strange world, the struggle for something as basic as water becomes a battle against an absurd authority. What does it mean to claim ownership over something as fundamental as rain? Imagine a time when the very act of collecting rainwater could land you in trouble. In medieval Europe, some peasants faced fines for hoarding moisture, and one woman was even accused of stealing atmospheric resources. A man was caught running outside with a bucket during a light drizzle, his offense dubbed attempted precipitation theft. It's striking to think that even weather wasn't free back then. Rain became intertwined with the feudal economy, reflecting a time when nature belonged to those bold enough to claim it, often with a sword in hand. Yet, amidst this struggle for resources, grass remained untouched by monetization. It grew abundantly, required no effort to cultivate, and was often a source of disappointment. While it served well for cows, goats, and sheep, desperate peasants sometimes turned to it during famines. Animals roamed freely across the commons, grazing as nature intended, blissfully unaware of the economic upheaval brewing around them. Everything shifted the day. A nobleman rode by the fields and noticed something alarming: peasants' livestock grazing without cost. His mind, untroubled by moral considerations or agricultural understanding, spiraled into panic. Free grazing meant free animals, which could lead to wealth for the peasants, and wealth could spark questions. Questions like, why are we starving while you have 12 kitchens? Such thoughts could not be tolerated. Isn't it fascinating how the simplest things can reveal deeper truths about society? Imagine a world where a single man claims ownership over something as simple as grass. This is the reality introduced by a baron who cleverly coins the term grazing rights. It sounds official, but really it's just a way of saying he intends to charge you for the grass that grows naturally from the earth. He announces this with an air of theatrical importance. The baron proclaims that all grass, whether it's standing tall, partially chewed, or even just a figment of imagination, belongs solely to him. If a cow gazes at grass on his land, it's deemed trespassing. If a goat wanders close, it's seen as attempted theft. And if a sheep dares to think about grass, that's conspiracy in the baron's eyes. Suddenly, what was once communal land, shared by the villagers, transforms into a complex legal battleground. Cows are no longer free to roam, goats are confined, shepherds find themselves acting like overworked security guards, always on the lookout for the baron's tax collectors, who hide behind bushes like medieval paparazzi. Some peasants attempt to negotiate, pleading with the baron. They remind him that this grass has always been free for everyone. But the baron, a man who believes the earth itself bows to his will, simply responds, "It is free for me." His smile doesn't reach his eyes, which perhaps have never known warmth. As a result, many struggling families find themselves spending half their income just to allow their animals to graze. This stark reality raises questions about fairness and humanity. How did it come to this? Would you stand by and watch as your way of life is taken away? The irony is striking. Peasants nourish the animals, and in turn, those animals provide taxes for the lords. The lords thrive on the satisfaction of transforming sunshine, soil, and chlorophyll into profit. A few daring peasants attempt to sneak their animals onto common land under the cover of night. These moonlit escapades resemble covert heists, with grass as the treasure and weary sheep as the thieves. Surprisingly, this medieval grass becomes one of the era's most lucrative discoveries, not due to any transformation, but because someone boldly claimed a meadow with the most rebellious word in feudal Europe: mine. If there's one thing medieval peasants relied on more than hope or prayer, it is beer. Not for its flavor, medieval beer tasted more like anxiety and damp hay, but because water could be more lethal than an invading army. Beer represents liquid safety, its hydration with a comforting edge. It's the only drink a medieval villager could consume without contemplating their own mortality. Of course, this meant the authorities had to interfere. Home brewing, once a simple communal tradition, saw every household crafting its own weak, murky brew. They used barley, local herbs, and sometimes even questionable ingredients that should never have been part of a drink for human consumption. Imagine a time when brewing beer was a cherished family tradition, one that brought joy without cost. But then, a councilman, whose personality could be likened to stale bread, made a startling discovery. He realized that people were enjoying beer without his oversight. This revelation sent him into a tailspin, much like the nobles of old, who felt uneasy when peasants smiled too freely. In response to this perceived crisis, the council introduced an ale tax, a measure meant to ensure that the only safe drink in medieval Europe now required government approval. Suddenly, your once humble brewing pot transitioned from a beloved family heirloom into a target of state scrutiny. Inspectors roamed the villages, sniffing the air like determined bloodhounds, searching for the unmistakable scent of unlicensed merriment. Picture a woman stirring a pot in her kitchen, only to be confronted by a perspiring official demanding to know if she was preparing soup or engaging in unauthorized beverage production. There was no right answer. To brew legally, peasants had to seek out the ale conner, a man tasked with the professional tasting of beer, whose liver had long since waved the white flag. He would determine, with the gravity of a judge passing sentence, whether your brew was fit for public enjoyment. If it met his standards, you would then owe a fee. Isn't it curious how something so simple could become so complicated? Imagine a time when brewing your own beer required permission, and if you didn't have it, you still faced a fee. Medieval justice had a certain predictability to it. Brewing without authorization turned into a perilous underground endeavor. Families would quietly brew at night, hidden behind closed shutters, hoping that the bubbling of their barley wouldn't betray them with an unwelcome hiss. Children took on the role of lookouts, peering into the darkness for the flickering light of the tax collector's lantern. Entire neighborhoods created a silent network of signals, akin to frightened birds warning each other of approaching inspectors. In this world, medieval beer transformed from a humble drink that connected thirsty peasants to their survival into a symbol of the era's injustices. It embodied corruption, excessive regulation, and the pervasive belief among the elite that happiness must always come at a cost. Forests served as the closest thing to a sanctuary for medieval peasants. They wandered into these wild spaces, gathering mushrooms that might be safe or deadly, collecting firewood, hunting the occasional rabbit, and enjoying the free gifts of nature, all while hoping to avoid wolves, bandits, or their landlords. It wasn't glamorous, but at least it was free. Then the kings and nobles discovered these forests, changing everything. Imagine a world where nature is no longer a shared sanctuary. Instead, it's transformed into a playground for the elite. The trees, the ecosystem, the very essence of wilderness. These are not just natural wonders anymore. They have become commodities, with the ability to charge people for simply touching the leaves. Vast stretches of woodland are suddenly deemed royal forests, a title that suggests grandeur, yet it really means that access is restricted to a privileged few. The announcement lands like a thunderclap, shocking everyone. One day, the forest is just a forest. The next, it's an untouchable sanctuary, reserved for the nobility and their leisurely pursuits. Hunting, riding, and engaging in trivial activities become their domain. Meanwhile, the peasants are left in disbelief. This forest has been their lifeline, offering fuel, food, and herbs, sometimes even a quiet place to vent their frustrations. Now, they face a harsh reality. They must stay away, or risk fines, imprisonment, or worse, a guard shaking a spear in warning. In this new order, the king's deer are valued more than the peasants themselves. To kill a deer without permission is treated with the utmost seriousness, akin to treason. In some regions, such an act could lead to execution, while the life of a peasant is met with mere inconvenience. If a noble accidentally runs over a peasant while hunting, the expectation is that the peasant should apologize for the damage caused to the noble's horse. Consider how this shift affects the fabric of society. What does it mean for the connection between people and the land they rely on? The forest that once nurtured them is now a symbol of exclusion and power. How do you feel about this transformation? The royal hunting parties bring chaos to the forest. Picture this: 100 nobles descend, trumpets blaring, horses galloping, and dogs barking as if they have a union of their own. They scare away every creature within 10 miles, and then, in their wake, they declare the forest overused. The peasants face even stricter bans. Some brave souls attempt to sneak in under the cover of night. They tiptoe through the branches like medieval ninjas, gathering herbs in a hushed panic. Each snapped twig feels like a death sentence, and every owl hoot echoes like a guard's shout. If they happen to stumble upon a deer, they must feign ignorance, pretending they've seen nothing, thought of nothing. What was once a sanctuary of freedom transforms into yet another symbol of medieval inequality. The trees remain unchanged, but the laws shift, and with a mere stroke of a quill, nature itself becomes a gated community. Marriage in the medieval world was meant to be straightforward. Two people would meet, decide they could tolerate each other, and unite to survive famine, taxes, and the occasional aggressive goose. It wasn't romantic, but it was practical, like forming a two-person alliance against a hostile universe. Yet one lord soon realizes there's something happening on his land that he's not benefiting from. What could this mean for the balance of power? Imagine a world where love is met with suspicion and financial demands. Picture two individuals deciding to marry, creating a household without first seeking permission from a powerful lord. This was seen as scandalous and fraught with danger, even revolutionary. To control this, lords introduced a marriage fee, a concept that seems trivial at first, but carries significant weight. This fee, known as the merchet, sounds innocuous, like a delightful pastry. Yet, it held a grim reality. Pay up, or your daughter remains bound to your household. Yes, medieval lords charged fathers for the right to allow their daughters to marry. Consider the plight of a weary farmer, scraping together coins not for a joyous wedding feast, but simply to gain the legal freedom to stop supporting his grown child. It was a transaction steeped in the absurdity of the medieval era. What's even more perplexing is that this fee had no direct connection to the wedding itself. You still needed funds for food, clothing, ale, and the priest, who was likely already preparing his disapproving expression. The merchant was just the Lord's way of saying, "I see your happiness. Now please pay to keep it." Some lords took their authority to an extreme, maintaining meticulous lists of eligible women, almost like running a disturbingly invasive subscription service. If a daughter married without paying this fee, the lord could impose fines on the entire family, refuse to acknowledge the marriage, or, in severe cases, forcibly return her to her father's home. This, understandably, put a damper on the honeymoon. Reflect on this strange intersection of love and power. How does it make you feel to think about love being entangled with such demands? In a time not so long ago, peasants fought to reclaim their freedom. Some daring individuals held secret weddings under the cover of night, guided by monks who had long since abandoned the constraints of earthly logic. Yet, in a village where walls were so thin that you could hear a fly sneeze, keeping secrets proved nearly impossible. News spread like wildfire, and so did the relentless tax collectors sent by the Lord. The plight of widows was especially harsh. If a widow chose to remarry, she often faced another fee, as if surviving one husband hadn't been challenging enough. The medieval bureaucracy seemed determined to charge you for every significant moment in life: birth, marriage, death, and even those fleeting joys in between. What should have been a simple union of love transformed into yet another financial hurdle. While love itself remained free, expressing it through legal means demanded small coins, immense patience, and a watchful lord always ready to swoop in, anxious about his profits. Bridges, too, were once simple creations in this medieval landscape. A few planks thrown across a stream, crafted by monks who had little else to occupy their time between prayers and debates over the morality of cheese. These bridges allowed peasants to traverse rivers without the fear of drowning, freezing, or being swept away like leaves caught in a storm of poor financial choices. They were free, functional, and occasionally sturdy, a testament to the ingenuity of the time. As you reflect on these stories of resilience and struggle, consider how far we've come. What lessons can we draw from the past? Imagine a time when a simple wooden bridge stood as a crossing point for peasants, a place where they could traverse without worry. However, the moment a nobleman noticed this, something changed. He looked at that bridge not as a shared resource, but as a lost opportunity for profit. In no time, a gate appeared at one end, guarded as if it were the entrance to a grand palace. Suddenly, crossing that bridge came with a toll. This fee wasn't about the bridge needing repairs. It always did. Yet that wasn't the reason. It wasn't for safety either, as crossing had never been dangerous. Instead, the Lord decided that convenience should come at a cost. As peasants approached, a guard would intercept them, asking with a heavy heart, "Toll, please." It felt absurd, a charge for crossing what seemed like a mere wooden plank. If a peasant dared to question this new toll, the guard's eyes would reveal a deeper understanding. He had once wondered the same thing, only to learn the harsh reality behind the Lord's decision. The official reason given was bridge maintenance, a curious claim since the bridge had been neglected since its construction. What does this story evoke in you? Consider how easily something once shared can become a tool for control. Imagine a bridge, half its planks loose and the other half rotting, wobbling as if it were in a personal struggle against gravity. Some villagers decide to brave the river instead, convinced that drowning is a better fate than paying the toll. Yet the Lord is one step ahead, ready to impose fines on anyone caught crossing the water without permission. It's a reminder that medieval laws often seem crafted by those who have never faced a bill themselves. The tolls are staggering, and when does a bill bekoper hopies fire peepees sibyl, 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 hopies fire peepees. A farmer crossing the bridge might lose a week's wages, while a merchant with goods could see a month's profits vanish. Even a cow crossing the bridge finds itself in debt, leading to the ridiculous sight of livestock burdened by financial obligations. Ultimately, this bridge stands as a perfect metaphor for medieval life: flimsy, overpriced, and barely functional, yet still profitable for the one person who rarely uses it. Peasants lead simple lives, anchored by three essential tasks: grinding grain, baking bread, and brewing beer. These aren't mere pastimes, they are vital skills for survival. This holy trinity represents their hope of making it through the harsh winter. For generations, they have managed these tasks themselves, wielding tools made from stones, wood, and an unwavering spirit. Everything seems to work smoothly, but it often takes just one person of noble birth to disrupt the entire system. The trouble begins when a baron, with too much time on his hands and a complete lack of empathy, observes peasants carrying out essential tasks without his approval. He watches them grind grain, bake bread, and brew beer. Instead of appreciating their industriousness, he thinks, how dare they? His solution is straightforward. He decides to turn every basic survival task into a taxable event. First, he establishes a milling monopoly, forcing peasants to grind their grain at the Lord's mill, a place that operates with all the grace of a collapsing wagon. Next, he introduces an oven tax, transforming communal baking into a bureaucratic ordeal, overseen by someone who can't even tell the difference between flour and dust. Finally, he imposes ale regulations, requiring permission to brew the only drink safe enough to consume without drafting a will. Each of these processes becomes a miniature nightmare. A villager trying to grind grain must trudge to the Lord's mill, wait in line, lose a portion of their flour to spillage, and pay a fee so hefty that they might start to wonder if the bread is worth the emotional toll. Baking becomes a challenge, as they must navigate the whims of the oven keeper, who behaves as if he's guarding the gates of heaven rather than overseeing a simple fire pit. Can you imagine the frustration? Imagine a time when brewing beer required an audience with the ale inspector, a man whose only real skill was consuming dubious quantities of questionable liquid. Peasants quickly realized they weren't just paying for a service, they were essentially paying for the right to exist. Even the act of brewing at home became a punishable offense. A woman caught making beer in her own kitchen faced fines for what was termed unauthorized fermentation. It sounds scientific, but really, it was just the Lord's way of saying stop being resourceful. If someone secretly baked bread, the smoke curling from their chimney was treated like a distress signal. Yet, the only ones who showed up were tax collectors. This led to a perfect medieval trap, a triple tax system where no milling meant no baking, and no baking meant no bread. Without bread, life became increasingly difficult, and the Lord collected taxes at every turn. It was the original subscription model, but with more hunger, constant surveillance, and far worse customer support. Medieval markets began as lively, chaotic gatherings filled with peasants shouting prices. Chickens often escaped, and sanitation was a foreign concept. The atmosphere was loud and messy, filled with the sense of unwashed bodies and vegetables that were, at best, technically edible. Imagine a vibrant marketplace where the air is filled with the scent of fresh produce. You can walk in freely, lay out a cloth on the ground, and sell your onions with the confidence of someone who owns nothing yet feels the thrill of entrepreneurship. This sense of freedom, however, is not destined to last. One day, a lord stands on his balcony, gazing down at the bustling scene below. A pang of discomfort strikes him as he witnesses people trading goods without offering him a share. To him, this free enterprise on his land feels bold, dangerous, and utterly unacceptable. So, he takes action. He installs a market gate, hires a perpetually grumpy gatekeeper, and declares that anyone wishing to enter the market must now pay a stall fee. In an instant, every peasant selling turnips becomes a reluctant taxpayer. But this is only the beginning. the fees multiply faster than you might imagine. First, there's the entrance fee, because simply walking into the market now requires a financial commitment. Next comes the space fee, as your modest square meter of dirt suddenly becomes a coveted piece of real estate. Then, the merchant fee is introduced, as the Lord graciously allows you to breathe his air while you sell your produce. In this way, the Lord has managed to monetize existence itself. The peasants, however, adapt as best they can. Some cleverly squeeze the goods of 3 families onto a single cloth, creating a shopping experience so cramped that it resembles a medieval thrift store designed by someone with a profound dislike for joy. As you reflect on this transformation, consider how the balance between freedom and control shapes our lives today. Would you find a way to adapt in such circumstances? Imagine a time when early market seekers faced a daunting challenge. They approached the gates only to find the collectors resting there like relentless trolls. The most frustrating part? The Lord offered no services in return. The ground was uneven, the stalls leaned precariously, and the smell? It was truly overwhelming. Safety felt like a distant memory as bandits roamed the aisles, looking as lost as the customers. Stray dogs snatched sausages right off the tables, and chickens made daring escape attempts, showcasing a surprising cleverness. Yet, despite the chaos, fees continued to rise. Some brave peasants tried to create unofficial markets in nearby meadows where trading was free and spirits soared. But the Lord wasted no time shutting these down, deeming them illegal gatherings, a medieval way of saying they forgot to pay him. In the end, medieval markets morphed from simple community gatherings into early versions of shopping malls. They became overcrowded, overpriced, and entirely controlled by someone who had never shopped there. By the close of the Middle Ages, one undeniable truth became clear: nothing remained free for long. Whenever something brought comfort, relief, or even a hint of joy to the peasants, it was only a matter of time before a nobleman appeared, scroll in hand and a smirk on his face, eager to impose a fee with the enthusiasm of someone who had never toiled a day in his life. Take a moment to reflect on this transformation and consider how it mirrors the complexities of our own marketplace today. This transformation unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly. It begins as a creeping infestation of ownership, a term once wielded by medieval lords to claim anything within their reach: bread ovens, rivers, forests, grass, bridges, beer, markets, and even marriages. All of these once belonged to the people, yet they gradually morphed into revenue streams for those whose primary role was to accumulate wealth. Initially, the peasants resist. Their defiance is quiet, for the Middle Ages are not known for fostering open discussion. They exchange whispers of discontent, roll their eyes behind haystacks, and craft surprisingly inventive insults involving goats. Yet this resistance proves futile. Lords quickly realize that peasants have needs, and if peasants have needs, they can be charged for fulfilling them. In fact, it becomes a perceived divine duty to do so. As the final centuries of medieval life progress, the logic becomes tragically circular. If something exists, it belongs to the Lord. If it doesn't, he claims it anyway. Once claimed, he charges for it. And if the peasants dare to object, he fines them for their dissent. This system feeds itself, much like a snake formed entirely of taxes. Even the realm of absurdity has its limits, yet medieval Europe seems determined to uncover new ones. As you reflect on this, consider the implications of ownership and power throughout history. What does it mean for us today? Imagine a time when a noble decided he owned the sunrise simply because it rose over his land. Another noble tried to impose a tax on the shadows cast by buildings. Then there was the one who thought it wise to charge peasants for using the road right outside their own homes. That idea didn't quite take off, primarily because the collectors struggled to figure out how to invoice sunlight. Over time, the peasants accepted their fate with a heavy heart, a resignation born from a lifetime of disappointments. They lived, worked, suffered, and prayed that perhaps the next generation might face slightly less burdensome fees for the very act of breathing. Little did they know, the future would bring about parking meters, subscription fees, and charges for checking luggage on flights. This shows us that while the Middle Ages eventually faded, the mindset that justified medieval taxation certainly did not. In truth, the real legacy of medieval Europe is this: everything was once free until someone decided to charge for it, and humanity has been paying the price ever since. Now, let's turn our attention to Legio X Fretensis. This legion did not emerge from the orderly, calm image people often associate with Roman legions. No, its origins were far more chaotic, born from violence and the saltwater spray that inspired its name. Fretensis translates to "of the Strait," a tribute to the Strait of Messina, where the unit's earliest soldiers first demonstrated their ability to fight on land, sea, and everything in between. From its inception, Legio X was not molded by parades or grand cities, but by fierce storms, sharp blades, and the tumultuous landscape of the Mediterranean. This legion was born under the command of Julius Caesar, a man driven by two passions, the pursuit of glory and the legions that made him appear invincible. When Caesar personally endorsed a unit, it signified that they were ruthless, disciplined, and strikingly efficient. Legio X quickly became one of his favorites, and with that distinction came advantages such as superior pay, prime camp locations, and a fearsome reputation that made adversaries shudder. However, it also came with daunting responsibilities, including the expectation to win battles that would challenge even the most seasoned commander. In their early days, the men of Legio X carved their legacy in the naval battles of the civil wars. It was rare for Roman legions to engage in combat at sea, but Caesar had little regard for tradition. If he required infantrymen to dash across the deck of a ship in the midst of a storm and confront Pompeian sailors, he expected them to comply without question, and they did just that. Their identity, a blend of soldier and sea creature, became ingrained in their pride, just as deeply etched into their shields. They also adopted a symbol that perfectly encapsulated their fierce character. Imagine the wild boar. It's not a noble eagle or a mythical creature. No, it's a boar. This is the kind of animal that charges headfirst into danger, refusing to die easily and leaving scars on anyone foolish enough to corner it. The soldiers of Legio X find meaning in this symbolism. It reflects their own nature, stubborn, fearless, and always ready to break through anything that stands in their way. By the time the 1st century of the empire arrives, Legio X Fretensis has already earned a reputation as one of Rome's most aggressive and dependable legions. They are fiercely loyal, brutal when commanded, and impossible to intimidate. They march wherever the emperors direct them, across deserts, over mountains, and eventually into the tumultuous province of Judea, where their legend will be forever etched in history. When Legio X receives orders to leave the Mediterranean and venture into the unpredictable heat of Judea, they are no longer just Caesar's old shock troops. They have transformed into a formidable instrument of imperial will. Years of civil wars, frontier policing, and constant reshuffling have molded them into something far beyond mere loyalty. They have become a legion that anticipates trouble, feeling slighted if a province fails to deliver it. Judea is not going to disappoint them. The province is already simmering as Legio X arrives. Local tensions, religious divisions, and Rome's knack for overtaxing everyone have created a situation on the brink of explosion. Even from afar, the legionaries sense they are stepping into a storm. Rumors spread faster than marching columns, whispering tales of uprisings, ambushes, fanatical rebels, and towns that refuse to submit. This is far from the peaceful retirement post that veteran soldiers joke about. It is a powder keg, and Legio X, as always, brings the spark, led by generals who favor force over diplomacy. As the legion marches south, they traverse landscapes that feel increasingly alien. The breezy coasts and fertile plains of the Mediterranean give way to harsh hills, relentless sun, and fortresses clinging to cliffs like stubborn barnacles. Many Roman soldiers take an instant dislike to Judea. It is hot, dry, and filled with people who remain unimpressed by Roman armor. But Legio X is not here to make friends. They are here to impose silence on a land that resists it fiercely. The legion establishes its early positions in coastal strongholds like Caesarea, but their true test lies ahead, deeper in the land. The province is splintered into pockets of resistance, some small, others disturbingly organized. Every hill seems to have a lookout, while every road holds the potential for danger. Patrols face ambushes, supply lines are constantly harassed, and scouts mysteriously disappear. In Roman terms, this signals one thing: a full-scale rebellion is on the horizon. When it erupts, Rome will respond with overwhelming force. Legio X is soon assigned to the incoming imperial commander, Titus, the emperor's son. He is ambitious, strategic, and unafraid to raise a city that refuses to comply. The legionnaires sharpen their blades, oil their armor, and brace themselves for a campaign that, even by Roman standards, promises to be brutal. They march toward the heart of the revolt, toward Jerusalem, where a siege will transform their name from one associated with Caesar's naval prowess into a symbol of devastation etched into the memory of an entire region. As Legio Tenfensis finally stands before Jerusalem, they see not just a city, but a fortress built from stone, faith, and defiance. The rebels have turned every wall, tower, and gate into a testament of resistance. And for the legionaries who have fought in deserts, forests, and coastal straits, Jerusalem presents a unique challenge, one that blends military strategy with psychological warfare. The city holds immense significance for its defenders, and such devotion often transforms sieges into far more brutal confrontations than Rome would like. Titus recognizes this reality. He knows that the rebellion won't be subdued through haste or grand assaults, but rather through patience and precision. So, the legion, along with other legions rallying under his banner, embarks on what Rome excels at, turning a city into a cage. The first step is encirclement. No one will leave, and no one will enter. As time passes, both food and hope will begin to dwindle. Positioned on the Mount of Olives, east of the city, Legio X has a clear view of the walls, temples, markets, and even the rooftops where watchers stand like silent sentinels. From this vantage point, the legion's engineers spring into action. They construct siege camps, watchtowers, palisades, and artillery platforms without delay. The sounds of hammers striking, wood creaking, and stone grinding resonate across the hills. The rebels witness this construction, and with each completed structure, the psychological pressure mounts. Yet the defenders do not remain passive. They initiate sorties, launching sudden and fierce attacks aimed at disrupting the Romans' efforts. Leoten finds itself in a constant state of skirmish. One moment they are building ramps, the next they are grabbing shields to fend off the screaming fighters charging down the slope. The rebels fight with a determination that even the toughest veterans of the Legion find impressive. They are not mere disorganized raiders. They are skilled and desperate, deeply familiar with their terrain. Yet Leo Fretensis presses on. Their artillery units bring forth ballistae and scorpions, machines capable of launching bolts and stones with enough force to pierce through shields. The Legion begins to bombard the city, not just to damage its structures, but to erode the spirit of its defenders. Each strike serves as a reminder Rome has come to quash this rebellion, and Leo Fretensis is determined to see it through. Though the siege is still in its early stages, the pattern is already evident. It is like an unstoppable machine tightening its grip. The city may have walls, but Legio Fretensis possesses time, iron, and the patience of an emperor. In a Roman siege, patience often becomes the deadliest weapon. As the siege drags on, Legio Fretensis settles into a rhythm of slow, methodical destruction. Sieges are not about glory. They are grueling tests of endurance. For a legion with decades of brutal experience, this is familiar territory. The men of Legio Fretensis know that every hour spent building, hammering, dragging stone, or firing artillery tightens the noose around Jerusalem's neck. The city's outer defenses stand strong and imposing. The rebels have fortified them with fresh masonry, watchtowers, barricades, and an unwavering determination fueled by faith and desperation. Legio X, positioned on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, has a singular mission: to weaken the eastern walls until they shatter like clay pots under a hammer. Yet the defenders are familiar with the terrain and launch relentless attacks from the gates and hidden paths. You witness the legionaries caught in fierce, chaotic skirmishes, brief but brutal clashes that leave dust, blood, and shattered tools strewn across the ground. In response, the Romans adopt their traditional strategy, bringing in heavier equipment. Engineers from Leo X construct towering siege platforms known as agratas and massive battering rams, coated with wet hides to shield them from flames. The defenders retaliate with burning torches, pots of pitch, and even molten substances, yet the legionaries press on. Each advance of the rams feels like a struggle against the very heartbeat of the city. Meanwhile, the Roman artillery crews labor tirelessly. The ballists snap, scorpions twang, and stones crash against the walls, each impact eroding the defenders' confidence. What will happen as the battle unfolds? Can the city withstand the relentless assault? As the tension builds, you are drawn deeper into this unfolding struggle. The rebels respond with slings, arrows, and shouts filled with defiance. Yet Legio X remains unfazed. They simply adjust their formation, raise their shields, and march forward once more. This relentless advance, cold and disciplined, instills a deeper fear in Rome's enemies than any weapon could. As the siege continues, the persistent bombardment begins to take its toll. Cracks spider through the masonry, stones loosen, and sections of the wall sag under their own weight. The defenders scramble to reinforce these weak points, piling debris and timbers in a desperate effort to keep Roman steel at bay. But the legionaries sense the impending collapse. They feel it in the trembling ground and see it in the bulging foundations. Every soldier understands what comes next. Once the walls give way, the battle will transform from a test of engineering to a brutal struggle for survival. Street fighting will ensue, moving from house to house, temple to courtyard, Jerusalem will become a labyrinth, and Legio 10 will carry the torch through it. As the walls finally buckle and sections crumble into heaps of rubble, a roar erupts, not just from Legio 10, but from every Roman soldier who comprehends the significance of a breached wall. This roar signifies that the siege has entered its most perilous and decisive phase. The battle now shifts into the heart of the city, where every wall, alley, and sacred space transforms each step into a struggle. Unlike the open ground, the interior of Jerusalem favors those who defend it. Lesion advances with caution. They have encountered cities before: Alexandria, Cyrene, and various rebellious towns, but Jerusalem is unlike any of them. Its layout resembles a labyrinth filled with courtyards, narrow streets, sudden staircases, rooftop paths, and fortified compounds. The rebels wield this terrain like a weapon of their own. Every corner conceals a slinger, every doorway hides a spearman, and every rooftop rains down stones. The legionaries, accustomed to fighting in formation, must adapt swiftly. Their shields become makeshift roofs, their formations shrink into smaller, more flexible units, and their movements grow slow and deliberate. Soon chaos is accompanied by smoke. Fires erupt as buildings are struck by artillery, torches are tossed, and the fighting spills into homes and markets. The city begins to suffocate under its own flames. For Legio 10, visibility diminishes, yet this turmoil also stirs panic among the defenders. Fire shows no allegiance. It consumes both rebels and Romans, obliterating hiding spots, collapsing roofs, and forcing fighters into the open. Despite the peril, the legion continues to press forward. Can you imagine the tension of each step taken in such a chaotic landscape? The determination to move ahead, even as the city burns around them, speaks volumes about their resolve. Their discipline binds them together like iron hinges in a storm. Officers shout commands above the chaos of screams and crackling flames. Horns echo through the alleys, signaling movements. Ballista crews reposition themselves, seeking clear lines of fire into the heart of the city. Even through the smoke, the boar emblem of the Legion pushes forward, etched into shields tarnished by soot. Jerusalem resists with the fierce desperation of a cornered beast. Rebels launch ambushes from hidden tunnels. Archers rain arrows down from temple walls. Defenders hurl stones from rooftops, holding their ground until Roman troops storm the stairs, clearing their path. The sacred geography of the city, its temples, marketplaces, and holy courtyards, becomes a battleground, marked by brutal close-quarters combat. Yet, the Legion possesses something the rebels lack: an unwavering certainty of victory. Rome does not retreat from cities, it consumes them. With each street conquered, every barricade shattered, and every fire engulfing another stronghold, Legio 10 pushes deeper into Jerusalem. The city, a burning labyrinth, is now a path for the Legion, moving like a flame through the chaos. As Legio 10 fights its way forward, all roads burning, ruined, and blood-soaked lead to one destination: the temple. The defenders view the temple as more than just a fortress. It represents the spiritual heart of their world, the last bastion of hope that holds their morale together. If the temple falls, the entire revolt could crumble. If it stands, Rome's victory remains unfulfilled. This creates an unavoidable clash, not just for a building, but for the emotional essence of a people. Titus understands the powerful implications of this battle. He initially wishes to preserve the temple, knowing that a destroyed holy site would serve as a lasting symbol of resentment, while a captured one would demonstrate Roman dominance. Yet, in the chaos of war, the desires of commanders often fade amidst the chaos of fire. fear, and weary soldiers in a city already half consumed by flames. Legio 10 advances along the eastern front, navigating through barricades made of overturned carts, shattered furniture, and broken columns. The defenders fight with renewed vigor. This struggle transcends mere territory. It's about the survival of their identity. Each rebel charging forward understands that they are buying precious moments for the temple behind them. The legions, with their emblazoned shields, press on regardless. As the fighting intensifies around the outer courts, flames from nearby buildings draw dangerously close, heightening the stakes of this monumental confrontation. Arrows streak overhead, and stones tumble down from the heights. And Roman soldiers force their way through doorways, splintering gates as they clear rooms and corridors one by one. It's a brutal and suffocating struggle. There are no grand formations or open field tactics here, just the relentless clash of shields and blades in these sacred halls. Amidst the chaos, an unexpected spark ignites where it shouldn't. Ancient wood, parched from the summer heat, catches fire. The flames leap from beam to beam, fueled by wind, debris, and sheer terror. Within moments, the fire spreads up pillars and races across ceilings. The defenders cry out for water, while the Romans plead for order. But the blaze is no longer under anyone's control. Legio X Fretensis attempts to contain the inferno, but war has no regard for preservation. As the flames roar higher, the rebels attack with frantic desperation, striving to repel the Romans and save their temple. The legionaries push back step by step, but the inevitable collapse of floors and the choking smoke signal that defeat is near. The temple burns, transforming from a sacred symbol into ash, its destruction echoing across the hills like a profound, shattering truth. The fate of Jerusalem is sealed. Legio X Fretensis has witnessed the heart of a civilization extinguished. Yet, the battle rages on. As the temple lies in ruins, reduced to a smoldering skeleton, Jerusalem struggles beneath layers of ash. You find yourself in the final, most tenacious phase of the campaign, pursuing the remnants of resistance that refuse to surrender. The destruction of the city's heart has fragmented the revolt's unity, yet the survivors remain resolute. Many defenders retreat into fortified quarters, underground passages, and hidden chambers, seeking any place to make a last stand. For the Legion, this shift transforms the siege into a relentless manhunt. The nature of the fighting has changed. No longer are there large-scale charges or open confrontations. Instead, Legio 10 navigates a labyrinth of debris, shattered columns, collapsed roofs, and cramped tunnels. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Every corner presents the threat of an ambush. These resolute rebels fight with nothing left to lose. Some hurl themselves at Roman shields with makeshift weapons, while others set traps or launch surprise attacks from the rubble. This urban jungle of smoke and stone presents unpredictable and exhausting challenges. Yet Legio 10 excels in systematic destruction. They advance through the ruins like a relentless tide, clearing each block with cold efficiency. Can you feel the tension in the air? The determination of those who remain? As the hunt continues, the stakes are higher than ever. Engineers meticulously dismantle tunnels, seal off hidden rooms, and break through walls to reveal the fighters within. Scouts diligently map the remaining strongholds. Artillery crews unleash short-range shots to obliterate the last stubborn pockets of resistance. Infantrymen, their faces grim and smudged with soot, press forward with a quiet certainty, aware that this is the final act. The rebels gather particularly around the upper city, the last significant stronghold of organized defiance. This area, characterized by its affluent homes, massive stone walls, and robust defenses, only serves to delay the inevitable. Legio Tenon approaches with a blend of discipline and brutality, battling up staircases, slick with dust and blood. They advance across rooftops guarded by archers and force their way through gates reinforced with furniture, beams, and whatever materials the defenders could scavenge. Slowly, the last pockets of resistance crumble. Some rebels surrender, worn down by hunger and exhaustion, their eyes hollow. Others fight to their last breath, determined not to be taken alive by the Romans. For Legio X, these final kills hold no sense of triumph. They are merely a grim necessity. The city that once stood defiantly is now a hollow shell, filled with fallen walls, burnt sanctuaries, and silent streets. By the time the upper city falls, resistance in Jerusalem is effectively extinguished. The rebellion has been decisively crushed, every limb severed, every artery cut. Legio Tenfensis, its shield scorched and emblem darkened by smoke, stands as a primary enforcer of Rome's will. The siege may be over, but their story in Judea is far from finished. With Jerusalem in ruins and the revolt dismantled, most legions would typically return home or be reassigned elsewhere. Yet Legio Tenfensis is not ready to leave Judea behind, not by a long shot. Rome seeks a lasting reminder for the region, something more compelling than mere taxes or governors. They desire a physical symbol of fear, discipline, and consequence. Thus, the emperor selects the perfect instrument, the very legion that shattered the rebellion. Legio Tenfensis will remain in Judea, casting its iron shadow over the land. Their new headquarters is established in Jerusalem itself. But what remains of that city, now a desolate expanse of charred stones and skeletal structures, it has lost its status as a cultural and religious center. For Legio Tenfensis, this ruin is not a tragedy. It transforms into a fortress. They settle on the western hill, constructing barracks, workshops, granaries, and walls over the remnants of what once was. Roman camps are not just temporary, they are built to last. As you reflect on this, consider how history shapes the places we inhabit and the legacies we leave behind. Would you like to explore more about this fascinating chapter in history? Imagine a world where organisms not only grow, but also reshape entire landscapes. The boar insignia soon flies over land, once considered sacred. This presence alters the very rhythm of Judea. Patrols march daily along the roads, while watchtowers rise like sentinels on major routes. Checkpoints are established to monitor movement between towns. Rebellious settlements find themselves under scrutiny, while peaceful ones face taxes and surveillance. The legion becomes the backbone of Roman control, a constant reminder that resistance is not just futile, it is perilous. Legio X fulfills this role with the cold efficiency expected from Rome. They swiftly and decisively quell minor uprisings. Their responsibilities extend to escorting officials, guarding supply caravans, enforcing laws, and constructing vital infrastructure. The roads, aqueducts, and fortified posts spread outward, each bearing the unmistakable mark of Roman engineering. Even those who have never encountered a Roman soldier can sense their influence in the very stones beneath their feet. Yet their duties go beyond mere policing. They remain a military unit, prepared to face larger threats. When the embers of the Bar Kokhba revolt ignite decades later, Legio X stands ready, its veterans marked by experience, relentless in their resolve, and its recruits raised in the shadow of Jerusalem's ashes. Imagine a rebellion brewing, one that promises to be one of the most intense challenges Rome has ever faced. At the heart of this upheaval stands Legio X, ready to engage once more. Yet, for now, the region remains in a tense calm. Markets buzz with activity, caravans make their way through the land, and Rome begins to reshape this province to reflect its own ideals. However, the people carry the weight of their past. They remember the events that unfolded and the force behind them. Legio X has transformed into more than just a legion. It has become an occupying presence, a stark reminder etched into the very fabric of the land. Their mission in Judea isn't over, it's evolving. By the time Legio X finally departs from its long-standing post in Judea, generations will have come and gone. New emperors will rise and fall. Cities elsewhere will thrive, decline, and be reborn. Yet, in Judea, the shadow of the legion lingers, heavy and unyielding, even after their presence has faded. Few legions in Roman history have influenced a region with such intensity as Legio X. Their involvement in quelling the Great Revolt has already secured their place in history, but the aftermath of their actions has made their legacy even more challenging to forget. They became the tools through which Rome transformed Judea into a land unrecognizable from its former self. The destruction of the temple, the establishment of garrisons, the redrawing of borders, the imposition of new taxes and laws, all of these changes occurred under the vigilant gaze of the legionaries, forever altering the landscape of Judea. As you reflect on this profound history, consider the echoes of the past that still resonate today. For many locals, Leotin embodies not just an adversary, but the very essence of Rome. Their brutal actions during the Bar Kokhba revolt, which occurred decades later, only intensified this perception. This uprising was fierce, meticulously organized, and far more expansive than the initial rebellion. Judean fighters established underground networks, fortified caves, and disciplined units ready to resist. In response, Rome unleashed its formidable might, sending multiple legions to the region. At the heart of this tumult was Legio X Fretensis. Seasoned by years of harsh duty, they dismantled rebel strongholds, collapsed cave systems, and relentlessly pursued fighters across deserts and ravines. When the rebellion ultimately faltered, the toll in lives and cities was staggering. The legion not only quelled a revolt, but also extinguished the hope for future independence. In the aftermath, Roman authorities transformed the region, creating a new identity under the name Syria Palestina. Old symbols were erased, traditional practices were suppressed, and cherished memories were buried beneath Roman urban development. Leotin remained stationed in the newly established provincial capital, Alia Capitolina, which had once been Jerusalem. Now it stood as a Roman colony, adorned with temples dedicated to Jupiter and squares laid over neighborhoods that had been destroyed. Even as centuries pass and the veterans of the legion are laid to rest, their legacy endures. Coins bearing their emblem are still unearthed from the earth. Forts constructed by their engineers continue to cling to ridges and plains. Inscriptions, etched by soldiers during moments of boredom, whisper fragments of their existence. The memories of the battles they fought, the sieges, the fires, the destruction, live on in the stories told by those who survived. Legio Tenfensis was not merely a military unit. It represented an era, a force that reshaped landscapes, cultures, and destinies. Its legacy is etched not on parchment, but in the ashes of cities and the scars of those who endured its might. Centuries later, history still remembers the boar of Judea. By the 12th century, Europe's once quiet towns have transformed into bustling, chaotic centers of trade. Carts clog the narrow streets, while workshops fill the alleys with noise and smoke. Foreign merchants arrive at dawn, unloading their goods. Bakers shout out their prices, and tanners fill entire districts with their pungent odors. Amid this vibrant chaos, craftsmen face a pressing dilemma. It's not the kind of freedom that inspires. It's the dangerous, unregulated freedom where anyone might claim to be a carpenter, a butcher, a shoemaker, or heaven forbid, a surgeon armed with nothing but a knife and a dose of confidence. Markets are bustling, but with that growth comes increased risk. Unscrupulous sellers offer watered-down ale, while butchers manipulate their meat supplies with dubious tactics. Weavers replicate patterns without the necessary skill, and inexperienced newcomers flood the trades, often undercutting prices and jeopardizing reputations. For you, as a medieval craftsman, your name is your lifeline. If customers lose faith in the quality of your work, your livelihood is at stake. Clearly, something needs to restore order. Surprisingly, the solution doesn't come from kings or bishops. It emerges from the craftsmen themselves. They begin to form sworn associations, groups of workers united not by family ties or noble lineage, but by their trade. These are the first guilds, alliances forged for survival in a rapidly evolving marketplace where regulations struggle to keep pace. Initially, these guilds are small circles of craftsmen agreeing on fundamental standards. A baker cannot sell bread that crumbles at the slightest touch. A blacksmith cannot forge horseshoes that break after just a few steps. A shoemaker cannot stitch leather so thin that it tears in the rain. The guild protects all honest workers by enforcing a shared code of quality. As towns grow, so too do the ambitions of the guilds. They come to realize that if they can control quality, they might as well control everything else. Imagine a time when prices, training, and competition defined who could practice a craft. What began as a simple agreement of cooperation gradually transformed into a powerful system. Joining a guild was no longer just a casual choice. It became a privilege. Members took oaths, paid dues, attended meetings, and defended their shared interests with the loyalty of a brotherhood. Apprenticeships were crucial, ensuring that skills were passed down with care. Journeymen traveled far and wide to learn from different masters, while those masters maintained high standards and safeguarded their secrets. Anyone operating outside this carefully constructed system was seen as a threat, and guilds responded to these threats with unwavering resolve. In a world dominated by kings and lords, it was the guilds that reigned over the streets, reshaping medieval life in ways that few could have anticipated. To truly grasp the rise of the guild system, you must delve into its core, the training ladder. Crafts in medieval times were not learned through books or classrooms. Instead, they were absorbed through long nights of hard work, calloused hands, and years spent under the watchful eye of a master. Guilds ensured that every craftsman, be it a baker, blacksmith, cooper, or goldsmith, followed the same rigorous path. The journey began with the apprentice, often a boy as young as 10 or 12. His parents would negotiate a contract with a master, pledging obedience in exchange for training, food, and a place to sleep, usually within the workshop itself. As you reflect on this, consider the dedication and sacrifice involved in mastering a craft. What does it take to truly commit to your passion? Apprenticeship is far from romantic. It's a journey filled with exhaustion. You sweep floors, chop wood, stir vats, fetch water, stretch hides, and endure countless scoldings while learning the delicate beginnings of your craft. Yet, this challenging experience builds loyalty. The guild values discipline, tradition, and consistency, and as an apprentice, you absorb all of these qualities before you ever handle a tool on your own. After years of dedication, sometimes as many as 7, you transition into the role of a journeyman. This title means you're now a day worker, earning payment for your labor. You gain the freedom to travel and work in various shops. Guilds encourage this wandering spirit, allowing journeymen to carry techniques from town to town, spreading skills like pollen. A stonemason from Paris might pick up a new trick in Cologne, while a weaver from Flanders could return with unique patterns from Florence. Trade routes transform into rivers of shared knowledge, all under the watchful control of the guilds. However, the journey is not over. The journeyman faces a formidable challenge, becoming a master. This achievement is not automatic. It involves obtaining approval, paying fees, and most importantly, creating a masterpiece, a flawless item that showcases your mastery of the craft. Some guilds require a chest with perfect joinery, a silver chalice free of dents, a loaf of bread weighing just right, or a shoe so expertly stitched that it appears to be grown rather than made. Each step is a testament to your skill and dedication. Imagine a world where the elite hold the keys to craftsmanship. Masters, the guardians of trade, own workshops, train apprentices, set prices, and participate in guild councils. They protect their techniques like precious treasures, each recipe, formula, and method carefully guarded. These secrets are invaluable, shaping not only the craft but the very economic life of the city. This structured hierarchy, apprentice, journeyman, master, brings uniformity, stability, and a sense of pride. Yet it also creates barriers. Outsiders, innovators, and unlicensed workers find the gates firmly shut. Those daring enough to establish their own workshops without permission quickly discover that the guild's brotherhood can be as stifling as it is protective. In a society ruled by kings and lords, guilds wield a power that can be even more daunting: strict, unwavering rules. These are not mere suggestions, they are solemn codes that every member must follow. They dictate everything, from baking bread to tanning leather, measuring cloth, setting prices, and even the hours a workshop can operate. In a landscape where chaos and competition threaten livelihoods, guilds offer a fortress of order. To join this elite circle, a craftsman must take a public binding oath, committing to uphold these revered traditions. These oaths are not mere poetry. They represent solemn promises to uphold quality, safeguard secrets, respect fellow members, and adhere to regulations that can be remarkably intricate. Imagine a guild of bakers dictating the precise weight of each loaf. Picture a guild of butchers determining which cuts of meat can be sold fresh and which must be preserved with salt. Consider a guild of goldsmiths enforcing purity tests, hallmarks, and regular inspections. Nothing is left to chance. This is not just about pride, it is a form of economic warfare. By establishing universal standards, guilds ensure that no member can undermine others by using inferior materials or careless methods. If one shoemaker sells flimsy boots that fall apart within a week, it could lead customers to distrust all shoemakers. That scenario is simply unacceptable. Quality transcends virtue. It serves as a defense mechanism. To enforce these standards, guilds appoint wardens or inspectors, individuals endowed with the authority to enter workshops without prior notice and scrutinize goods. When fraud is uncovered, the consequences are severe. They do not simply offer a reprimand. They impose fines, confiscate goods, and publicly shame offenders. In extreme cases, they might destroy substandard items in the streets or expel wrongdoers entirely. Once expelled, a craftsman's career is effectively over. In this world, without the approval of a guild, trust is hard to come by. Customers hesitate, and workshops turn their backs. Guild meetings take place in various settings, halls, taverns, or even churches, acting as informal parliaments. Here, masters engage in lively debates about market conditions, assess the progress of apprentices, set seasonal prices, and determine punishments for those who stray. Some guilds maintain chests filled with emergency funds, tools, or essential documents, while others invest in chapels, commission altars, or fund grand feasts. Yet, beneath this facade of camaraderie lies a firm grip on control. The influence of the guild extends far beyond economics. It permeates social life, dictates festivals, organizes parades, and even supports charity. It can overshadow the bonds of family, village loyalties, and at times faith itself. A man's guild becomes his very identity, and breaking its rules is seen as a profound betrayal. This system thrives because it is rooted in authority. Guilds don't merely seek obedience, they demand it. In return, they offer something invaluable in the unpredictable landscape of the medieval world: stability. By the 13th century, guilds have evolved from simple groups of craftsmen striving to uphold standards into formidable economic forces that shape entire towns. This transformation is especially evident in the bustling medieval markets, where chaos reigns. These markets are anything but tranquil. They are arenas filled with shouting merchants, competing interests, and relentless rivalry. As you reflect on this vibrant tapestry of life, consider how these dynamics influence not just commerce, but the very fabric of society. Imagine a world where chaos lurks just beyond the edges of order. In this realm, guilds emerge as the guardians of structure, transforming society into a carefully managed ecosystem. They don't just participate in markets, they dominate them. Each guild claims exclusive rights to produce and sell specific goods within town walls. Bakers, for instance, can only sell bread if they belong to the Bakers Guild. Blacksmiths craft tools only with guild approval, while butchers operate under the watchful eyes of their guild. Even barbers, who double as surgeons, must adhere to guild regulations. This system creates monopolies that can be both a blessing and a curse. For customers, a guild monopoly offers the promise of stable quality, predictable prices, and fewer unpleasant surprises. No one wishes for a poorly crafted horse, a weak beam in their home, or a physician who learned his craft through trial and error. Guild control helps prevent disasters from occurring. However, there is another side to this coin. Monopolies breed protectionism. Guilds guard their privileges fiercely, much like dragons hoarding treasure. No outsider, regardless of skill, can establish a workshop without permission. Foreign merchants face strict regulations, allowed to sell their goods only on specific days and in designated areas. As you reflect on this, consider the balance between order and chaos in your own life. How do the structures around you shape your experiences? Imagine a wandering tinker daring to repair pans within the city's boundaries without permission. In this world, guild officers would swiftly seize his tools and escort him to court. The guilds exerted control not only over individual trades, but also over the very layout of towns. They determined where shops would be situated, how stalls were arranged, and which crafts would cluster together. Certain streets became synonymous with specific trades, like Goldsmith's Lane, Butcher's Row, and the Showmaker's Quarter. These arrangements were more than mere convenience. They represented strategic centers of power. Guild members took on multiple roles, patrolling markets, checking weights and measures, enforcing fair practices, and reporting violations. They functioned as a blend of economists, police, and local politicians. Their presence brought a sense of stability to daily life, yet it also created friction. Markets transformed into mini-states, each with its own laws, emergencies, and political dynamics. Tensions often escalated during supply shortages. Prices would surge, customers would voice their frustrations, and guilds would scramble to regulate production. Despite these challenges, guild monopolies turned cities into organized commercial engines, predictable, prosperous, and secure enough for trade to thrive. However, beneath this veneer of order lay simmering conflict. As guilds tightened their grip, other groups, merchants, nobles, and even kings began to pose a dangerous question. What would happen next? Should guilds truly hold this much power? If they were merely economic entities, their rise would have been remarkable, yet fleeting. What truly fortified them, intertwining them into the fabric of medieval life, was their role as communities, almost like families, bound not by blood, but by shared craft, pride, and tradition. Being part of a guild meant belonging to something greater than yourself, a force that shaped a person's identity from the moment they entered as a nervous apprentice until the day they were laid to rest. Each guild had its own unique rituals, feasts, symbols, and patron saints. Bakers honored Saint Honoratus, while masons found protection under the Virgin Mary, and goldsmiths revered Saint Eligius. These were not mere embellishments, they served as emotional anchors. In a world filled with uncertainty, marked by famine, plague, war, and fire, guild rituals provided structure and spiritual comfort. When guild members gathered at their altar for Mass, they didn't see rivals or competitors. Instead, they recognized brothers united by their craft. Guild feasts were legendary, supported by membership dues and fines, with tables overflowing with roasted meats, spiced breads, and barrels of ale. These celebrations were not simply opportunities to indulge. They were vital communal experiences that reinforced bonds and traditions. As you reflect on this, consider the profound sense of belonging that such communities fostered. What does that sense of connection mean for you today? In the heart of a medieval guild, hierarchy is a defining feature. Masters take their place at the high table. Journeymen occupy the middle, while apprentices sit at the edges. Each toast, blessing, and performance of a guild song serves as a reminder of the structured lineage to which every member belongs. Charity plays an essential role in the identity of the guild. Members contribute to funds that support widows, the sick, the disabled, and craftsmen who find themselves in tough times. If a workshop suffers a fire, the guild is there to rebuild. When a member passes away, the guild ensures his burial is taken care of. Should an apprentice lose their parents, the guild steps in as a surrogate guardian. In a time when medieval society lacks social services, guilds fill this gap with remarkable generosity. The guild halls, often impressive structures made of timber or stone, serve multiple purposes. They are not just meeting places, they act as political centers, archives, banquet halls, and courts. Within these walls, disputes are resolved without the need for city authorities. Masters adjudicate conflicts, fines are imposed, oaths are taken, and decisions are made. The hall stands as a symbol of unity, authority, and the enduring nature of the craft. Parades and processions further solidify the guild's presence in the community. On feast days, members proudly march through town, dressed in their finest attire, banners waving, tools gleaming, and chests held high. This display not only showcases their skills, but also reinforces their commitment to the guild and its values. As you reflect on this rich tapestry of tradition and support, consider the impact of such organizations in shaping communities and fostering a sense of belonging. Wouldn't you agree that the bonds formed through these shared experiences are truly remarkable? It's not just about pride, it's about advertisement, political theater, and a powerful reminder to everyone watching that this craft holds both honor and strength. The medieval guild represents more than just a workplace. It embodies a brotherhood, a church, a social club, a welfare system, and a political faction, all in one. This unity would soon lay the groundwork for conflicts much larger than mere disputes over bread or boots. As guilds gained authority, they inevitably found themselves in conflict with another rising force in medieval towns, the merchant class. If craftsmen are the hands of the city, then merchants are its lifeblood, circulating goods, money, and influence throughout Europe. For a time, both sides thrived together. Guilds relied on merchants to sell their products, while merchants depended on guilds to ensure quality. However, by the 13th century, tensions began to simmer beneath the surface. These tensions soon erupted into open political warfare, boiling down to a single question: who controls the city? Guilds aimed to protect their crafts, while merchants sought to expand trade. Though these goals might seem compatible, they were anything but. Merchants desired the freedom to buy and sell from anyone, anywhere, at the best price, while guilds insisted that all goods must pass through their quality checks, price limits, and monopolies. As you reflect on this dynamic, consider what it means for power and control in a community. How do these historical conflicts resonate with the challenges of our time? Picture a time when merchants and guilds are locked in a fierce rivalry. To merchants, the rules of the guilds feel like chains, restricting their freedom. Yet to the guilds, the merchants symbolize a threat to centuries of tradition and stability. In many towns, this conflict evolves into political factions. Merchant families band together to form councils and alliances, creating a new urban elite. In response, guilds unite, sometimes merging dozens of trades to resist the encroaching influence of the merchants. And why? Imagine town councils transforming into battlegrounds where bakers, butchers, cobblers, and smiths debate against wealthy traders, bringing in fine cloth from Bruges or exotic spices from Venice. In some cities, like Lübeck or Genoa, merchants gain the upper hand. They command fleets, control tax revenues, and establish international connections, pushing guilds into secondary roles. However, in places like Florence, Ghent, and Cologne, guilds take over city governments, reshaping urban life into a realm dominated by craftsmen. This power struggle is not without violence. In Florence, the Ciompi revolt erupts as wool workers rise against the merchant oligarchs. In Ghent, guild militias march through the streets, wielding axes and banners. Even in London, the tension between craft guilds and merchant guilds weaves a complex tapestry of city politics that endures for generations. Medieval urban life is anything but tranquil. Beneath the clamor of ringing hammers and bustling markets lies a persistent tug-of-war over authority. What does this struggle reveal about the dynamics of power and tradition in a changing world? In a world marked by conflict, both merchants and craftsmen find themselves intertwined in a delicate dance. A merchant without goods holds little value, just as a craftsman without buyers feels powerless. This rivalry creates a paradox, where cities flourish most when these two forces balance ambition with regulation. Yet, this fragile equilibrium is easily disrupted. Economic downturns, disease outbreaks, and political upheavals can shift the scales dramatically. As the 14th century approaches, the world stands on the brink of transformation. heralding the rise of guilds into their golden age, followed by a slow decline. Despite their claims of brotherhood and solidarity, guilds often operate as gatekeepers. They possess a polished, ritualized respectability, yet they maintain exclusive control. This dynamic is particularly evident in their treatment of women, migrants, and unlicensed workers. The medieval guild system may have shaped towns, but it did so unevenly. Women's roles varied widely across Europe. In many crafts such as brewing, textiles, and baking, women played crucial roles. They spun wool, brewed ale, stitched garments, and managed market stalls. In certain regions, they even inherited workshops or carried on businesses after their husbands passed away. However, despite their significant contributions, they rarely found a welcome in guild leadership. Consider how these dynamics shape society. What stories might emerge from the shadows of these guilds? As we explore further, remember the voices often left unheard. Women often appear in historical records as craftswomen, brewers, or alewives. Yet they frequently face barriers to full membership, often being excluded from voting, holding office, or training apprentices. There are exceptions, particularly in certain guilds within the textile towns of Flanders or the brewing hubs of England. These guilds may grant women limited membership or partial rights. However, even in these instances, the upper echelons remain predominantly male. The system relies heavily on family labor, with wives and daughters contributing significantly, yet official power remains firmly in male hands. Migrants encounter a different kind of exclusion. As towns grow, they attract workers from rural areas, refugees from conflicts, and ambitious craftsmen seeking better prospects. However, guilds impose strict control over who can join. High admission fees, lengthy apprenticeship requirements, and rampant local favoritism create significant barriers. Outsiders can only work as assistants or day laborers, often unable to ascend to master status without a sponsor. In response to these restrictions, unlicensed workers emerge. These craftsmen operate outside guild regulations, repairing shoes in alleyways or forging nails in hidden workshops. Many are simply individuals struggling to survive. Guilds label them as interlopers, foreigners, or illegal craftsmen, and they combat these workers with relentless determination. Reflect on the resilience of those who strive for recognition in a system that often overlooks them. How do these stories resonate with you today? Imagine a time when wardens raided shops, confiscating tools and imposing fines, all in an effort to maintain control. Public humiliation served as a stark warning. Despite these efforts, guilds struggled to eliminate unlicensed workers. As cities expanded, the demand for affordable labor surged. These unofficial workers filled the void, often operating in risky conditions, lacking proper training, and producing subpar goods. Tensions simmered beneath the surface. Guilds held a deep disdain for these laborers, while townsfolk depended on them for essential services. Authorities found themselves navigating a delicate balance between the strict regulations of the guilds and the pressing needs of urban life. Marginalized groups, women, migrants, and unlicensed craftsmen lived in the shadows of guild dominance. They were vital to the economy, yet remained largely unrecognized, contributing to a commercial landscape that often overlooked their importance. As the 14th century approached, these underlying tensions became increasingly evident. The arrival of the century felt like a hammer striking down. War, famine, and economic instability began to chip away at the fragile foundations that medieval towns had painstakingly built. However, nothing struck harder than the Black Death. When the plague swept across Europe, claiming the lives of 1/3 to half of the population, it did more than take lives, it shattered the labor market. Workshops stood empty, and masters perished along with their entire households. In this turbulent era, the absence of skilled labor and the devastation of communities would reshape the very fabric of